We've got breaking news over the last 24 hours. As President Trump lays out his final demands for Iran, Defense Secretary Hegseth delivers a stark warning: accept a great deal or face the War Department. And while everyone is looking at Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu lays a bombshell. Israel's on its way to expanding control of Gaza to 70%. Are these separate stories or part of a much bigger strategy taking shape? The answer could change everything. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Let's get right to it. President Trump laying out his next steps on Iran in an interview over the weekend with Fox News. Let's get right to it.
So what does a good deal look like for you?
Well, first of all, there's no deal that's good enough because the media will cover it. And we're making a great deal. We're going to make it a great deal. Or we'll just go back and finish it off militarily. But this would go faster. It's probably better on a humane standpoint. There's something nice about it also. You save a lot of lives. Whether it's the other side or not, you save a lot of lives. But we're close to a very good deal, and if we can make it good, otherwise we just start up with the Department of War, as we call it. I would rather get a deal because we can open the strait immediately upon signing. The one guarantee that I have to have is that there will be no nuclear weapons. They've agreed to that. And it was very interesting. They originally said, we will not develop a nuclear weapon. I said, well, what happens if you buy a nuclear weapon? So now it says we will not develop or in any way purchase a military weapon. That's a big difference.
At the same time, U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth saying that it has to be a great deal with Iran. Let's check out this clip.
Any deal that the president is willing to make, he's only going to make it if he believes it's a great deal for our country and the security of the world. And only one president was willing to lay it out on the line.
Iran has a choice: meet at the table with the president and give up their nuclear program. And as the president said, I'm lost on time, 2 days ago now, in the cabinet meeting, I'm sitting right next to him. He looks in the camera and says, well, Iran can either do it the right way with a deal across the table, or they can deal with my guy on the left. That happened to be me. But it's not me, it's you guys.
There you have it, Alex. Iran has a choice: either sign a deal, which the president wants it to be a great deal, or face the consequences.
Well, the president is talking about a deal only being a great deal in order to make it look like he's gotten a good deal. The Iranians, they want to negotiate. To them, being under fire in option one or being at the negotiating table is option two. They want option two because they have a chance at the negotiating table. The president, you're talking about a deal. The first objective of any deal is just to get the Straits of Hormuz open, and that is a priority for America's allies in the region, including Qatar, including the United Arab Emirates. They want to see these straits open. Remember, the straits were not closed before this military operation. And what does open mean? It means free passage. This is an international waterway. You cannot have the Iranians blocking the straits. You also cannot have the Iranians assessing a toll on boats going through the straits. So this is Trump's first number one priority, to see the Iranians lift the blockade, and then America, what it would do is lift its own blockade, its secondary blockade of the Straits of Hormuz. And we've already started to see reports that some ships have been moving through the straits. It's believed that ships had already been moving through the straits close to the coast of Oman, but to really see this waterway fully open, and we've seen that some of these ships have even been escorted by U.S. Navy vessels. In terms of like what a larger agreement looks like, they're still talking about signing an agreement that opens up a 60-day pathway to a firm nuclear agreement, which means that the Iranians can open up the straits, give Trump what he wants immediately. He wants to get his allies happy. He wants to start to see prices of oil lowered around the world, as well as in the United States, where high prices of oil are creating like another form of inflation on American citizens and around the world. Does that mean that Iran is going to sign a deal, or that Iran is going to agree to give up its nuclear ambitions, or that even if it agrees that it's going to abide by that agreement? I mean, the chances of that, I think most people believe, are low. And so Trump right now is in a bit of a difficult situation. You know, get a deal because we got to get the straits open quickly. or go back into a military operation, which he doesn't really want to do. That's clear. I mean, you could see that if he'd wanted to go to a secondary round of military operation, that America could have done it already. So you see the fact that the president's delaying, that he really wants to try to avoid this. But until a deal is signed and until a deal is not only confirmed but adhered to, you don't have a deal. And it could be that the president just wants to see some kind of a stability right now. And then you get into a situation where you go towards the midterm elections in the United States. As you get closer to the midterms, much less likely that the United States would engage in a secondary military operation there. Perhaps maybe after the midterm elections, when Trump doesn't need the goodwill of voters to get the members of Congress elected that he wants, then you might see the president go back when he doesn't have these domestic concerns. But of course, for every day that goes by that you don't have a military operation, it's probably that much less likely that you will see a return to the use of force.
So Alex, let's go back to the U.S. demands. You mentioned the opening of the Strait of Hormuz without any sort of tolls to any of the ships passing through there. In addition, the president has said now for months, I would say, that Iran must agree they will never have a nuclear weapon or a bomb. Can they be trusted? You asked that question a second ago. In addition, the president says that the U.S., maybe along with China, would take out the nuclear dust, the enriched material, which is now believed to be buried deep underground in Iran as a result of the bombing campaign by Israel and the U.S.
I mean, you're talking about highly enriched uranium. There may be enough uranium there for 10 nuclear bombs. And when you're talking about highly enriched uranium, the way it works with uranium is that, to begin to enrich it takes the longest. And then as it gets more further and further enriched, the amount of spinning that's required to get it to nuclear grade becomes less and less and less. So if there's a will among the Iranians to take the 60% enriched uranium to the end, and it's believed that they may have some highly enriched uranium that's even beyond 60%. It could even be close to 90% enriched uranium, that to go from there to nuclear bomb can take a very short period of time. So for the president, it's still very important to go in there and get it. And there's two ways you can get it. Again, it's number one, if they deliver it to you, they allow you to go in the front door and to take it, or if you have to order an operation to go and get it out. And how long does that take? We don't understand necessarily, how deeply buried this enriched uranium is under some of the sites. What we do know is that the United States and Israel intentionally did not target the sites where the highly enriched uranium is buried, because they didn't want to maybe create some kind of environmental disaster there, or they wanted to make sure that they were able to get it out in its entirety. So certainly, that is the thing here that Trump needs to be able to say, that A, we got the Straits of Hormuz open, B, that Iran has committed to never developing, or as you saw in the clip, acquiring a nuclear weapon, and certainly not having the material that they would need if they decided that they wanted to break their commitment and race through and develop a nuclear weapon. We're not hearing anything in these talks yet about the funding of terror proxies in the region. And what we are hearing about is that the United States may provide an incredible amount of sanctions relief to Iran for the purposes of rebuilding and repairing some of the damage that was committed by the U.S. and Israeli Air Force as part of the military operation. And the question is, well, what are they going to do with that money? You look back at President Trump talking about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and the president was shocked about how much money President Obama had delivered, over $1 billion in cash to the Iranians. And here you're talking about payments that could be, what's being reported at least, is could be as much as $300 billion in sanctions relief. It's an incredible amount of money. It doesn't mean that the United States is going to hand deliver that. There might be some other formulation for how the Iranians can get money, perhaps via the Qataris or via loans or other things like that. But it's still flushing this regime with capital, and they don't have a good track record of what they do with that capital. They use it to build an illicit nuclear program. They use it to fund terror proxies around the region.
For sure. And Alex, we're in a situation right now where there's a ceasefire, yet sides are attacking each other. We've talked about this in regard to Lebanon. We'll get to Lebanon soon. But over the last several days, you have Iran firing drones at U.S. ships, and then the U.S. striking back on southern Iran this past Thursday, again, after Iran fires drones trying to cross the Strait of Hormuz, drawing retaliation from Tehran against a U.S. military base, the most serious clashes since the ceasefire began. So it's a ceasefire, but the sides are still firing on each other.
Well, this is also a strategy of prolonging talks, right? If you're just talking, and no side has a real credible threat of some sort of a military action, then each side loses a little bit of leverage. So the idea that Iran would start firing at some ships, they're actually testing the United States and seeing exactly what a response could be. And the United States did fire back in a strong but limited way, but then using that threat of major military force as a way to pull the Iranians back to the table. So you're seeing here, yes, on the one hand, you have a ceasefire. On the other hand, you don't have yet any kind of a signed agreement that formalizes that ceasefire or that gets the United States what its demands are. And so you do have this like tit for tat testing of each side's will and using that force as a lever of toward a negotiation.
Alex, earlier you mentioned a potential of sanctions relief, but here you have on Wednesday the Trump administration imposing sanctions on Iran's newly created Persian Gulf Strait Authority, accusing it of helping the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps extort commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. This is something I've never heard of, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. This is some new Iranian creation which just came out.
Well, I mean, you have in New York City, you have the Port Authority, and what does the Port Authority do? It runs the toll booths at the entrances of the bridges and the tunnels, and that is what the United States doesn't want to see. They don't want there to be a toll charge on ships passing through. Again, this is not like a canal like the Suez Canal in Egypt or the Panama Canal, where a country basically created a waterway for the purpose of facilitating commercial sailing. This is an international waterway, a natural waterway, and it's never been tolled before. And the last thing the President of the United States wants to see is the Iranians starting to create a toll. We've actually seen Oman saying, well, wait a second, we can toll the Straits of Hormuz, so we should toll it as well. And then you had the Treasury Secretary issuing a threat that he would sanction Oman if they started to put a toll on the Straits of Hormuz, and then that you could actually see other countries around the world saying, wait a second, we also have straits here. There's lots of places where you have very narrow waterways that are important waterways for commercial travel, specifically in the delivery of oil or other commercial goods. And you don't want to have those countries saying, well, we'll put a toll on our waterway as well. So very, very important here that the Trump administration will level sanctions against any operation that seeks to establish tolls on the Straits of Hormuz.
Now, you and I both know that President Trump posts on his Truth Social all the time, sends out these messages, seems like almost every couple minutes even. And in regards to Iran, I thought this was very interesting. The president saying that as a result of the perhaps end to war, he would like to see countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others, join the Abraham Accords, the agreement between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, normalization agreement. And he actually said he would like to see the Islamic Republic of Iran as part of the Abraham Accords. And he said, wow. So, I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. I mean, maybe I would argue that, when the regime collapses, please God soon, that Iran will be poised eventually to join a normalization deal with Israel, maybe even very quickly. But with the regime still intact, is this realistic at all?
Well, I don't think so. Yeah, like you said, if the regime would fall and you would have the installation, for example, of the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi coming into power, could he normalize relations with Israel? I think he would be very apt to consider normalizing relations with Israel. But I think a more important question is not whether Iran will do it, but whether some of these other countries would do it. And certainly the country that was believed to be the closest toward normalizing was Saudi Arabia. Now, this whole concept of the Abraham Accords was already being discussed in the Trump administration all the way back in 2018, 2019. And it took a lot of time for Israel and the United States to get to the point where they could get to an agreement. Part of that was just because it took the Trump administration time to realize that there was a prize here, which is normalizing relations between Israel and other Arab countries without first solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But then after that, you had this period of these 5 consecutive elections in Israel. And this created an uncertainty that made the Saudis and others hesitate before entering into the Abraham Accords. So you didn't actually have the signing of any Abraham Accords until 2020, when the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan entered those first 4 Abraham Accords normalization agreements. Now, at that time, you had a situation in which there was a much closer alignment between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And what we've seen now, particularly in the last year, is that there's been a bit of a distancing between the Emiratis and the Saudis. A lot of it has to do with the Saudi support for the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly Muslim Brotherhood factions in Yemen, with the Emiratis not wanting anything to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. So there became some kind of differences of opinion in the foreign policy strategies of the Emirates and the Saudis. And that's making it more difficult for the Saudis to enter into some kind of agreement. Now, the President of the United States has a tremendous amount of leverage right now over the Saudis, the Qataris, and others. On the one hand, they need him in order to create some sort of stability in the Persian Gulf. At the same time, the Saudis in particular, they're looking for massive defense deals together with the United States, and they might not be able to get those defense deals under another president. Certainly, we saw the way the Biden administration treated the Saudis over the Khashoggi affair, and so they weren't really looking at the Saudis as an ally under the Biden administration. And you might have another president come after Trump who takes a more isolationist view toward the Middle East and not wanting to engage in these kind of defense deals. So the Saudis want what they want now from the United States, which means that the president has a lot of leverage, and he wants to see this normalization agreement happen for a few reasons. Number one, it's like a crowning diplomatic achievement. You know, we all have seen that President Trump has talked often about wanting to get a Nobel Peace Prize, and certainly starting a war with Iran doesn't really further your candidacy for a Nobel Prize by the international community. Yet signing some kind of agreements that would essentially end the greater Arab-Israeli conflict, that could be Nobel Prize worthy. So on the one hand, there's this sort of like personal, there's a personal aspiration here. And then the other part is just the creation of this alternative trade route to the Chinese Belt Road Initiative, which is the IMEC corridor, which really depends on goods being able to move from India over to the Persian Gulf, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, through Israel, off the Haifa port in Israel, to send goods to Europe and to the West. So this really depends on some kind of a normalization if you want goods to be moving through these countries. Could it happen? It could happen. Probably these countries are waiting to see what's going to happen in the upcoming Israeli elections, because they want to know who they're getting into bed with. Who are we signing an agreement with? Are we signing an agreement with Netanyahu, who's now going to be in office together alongside President Trump for the next 2.5 years, and then possibly beyond that? Is there going to be another Israeli government in place? Is that going to be a government that's going to try to undo some of the advances that the Netanyahu administrations have made over the years with regard to Middle Eastern diplomacy? So there's a lot in flux right now. And are these accords on the table? I think it's possible, but you need to see how some of these pieces fall into place.
To be continued. And Alex, I want to pivot now to the situation in Lebanon. Reports indicating the IDF is moving further north, perhaps even past the Litani River. Images this morning that the IDF has captured the Beaufort Castle, which is really a symbol of Israel's incursion into Lebanon in the early 80s. At the same time, strikes in Beirut for the first time in several weeks, a target assassination. Ali al-Husseini, the commander of the missile force and the Imam Hussein division, which is a branch of the IRGC. At the same time, unfortunately, it seems that almost every other day there's an Israeli soldier who's killed by one of these suicide drones being fired by Hezbollah. So you have the troops advancing further than they have been in a very long time. Target assassinations continue. And at the same time, unfortunately, IDF soldiers are paying the ultimate price to keep us safe here with these suicide drones. A lot going on in Lebanon right now.
Right. And when we were talking about Iran and the possibility of signing a negotiated agreement there, one of the Iranian demands is that they want to see a ceasefire, not just between the United States and Iran. They want to see a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, what does a ceasefire mean? You know, we've talked about this, how Israel has managed to change the definition of ceasefire, right? So remember, we were talking about the Beaufort Castle, right? This is a spot that Israel had controlled in previous wars, and we know that Israel had a war with Lebanon in 2006. Maybe during that war, they had filed down Hezbollah, let's say, 20 to 30% of what their capacity was before that war in 2006, which on the one hand, it seems like a good accomplishment. But then what happens is that you get a ceasefire agreement. You get the UN Resolution 1701, which brings in UN peacekeepers rather, in UNIFIL in order to govern or basically prevent the rebuilding of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And what did Hezbollah do? They rebuilt right under UNIFIL's eyes. So instead of them being filed down, let's say 20% of their capacity, not only did they recover that 20% to where they were before that war in 2006, but under UNIFIL, under UN 1701, they actually continued to build up a force posture 100 to 1,000 times what they were. And that's the kind of ceasefire that Hezbollah and Iran want to see. They want to see a ceasefire where UN peacekeepers come in, Israel is prevented from shooting, and they're able to consolidate and rebuild to get to a position that's even stronger than they were before October 7th in this last war. Now, the ceasefire agreement that Israel originally signed with Hezbollah during this war in November of 2024, Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer brought the plan to the Israeli cabinet. The cabinet said, well, we don't want to have a ceasefire agreement because they're thinking about the 2006 version of ceasefire agreement. And what Dermer and Prime Minister Netanyahu were presenting is a new kind of a ceasefire agreement where Israel reserves the right to continue to strike in Lebanon. So we've kind of redefined and flipped ceasefire on its head. Instead of allowing a ceasefire being something that prevented Israel from striking while the terrorists rebuild, now it's if terrorists make any moves towards rebuilding or reorganizing, that Israel strikes. And that's what you call a ceasefire. Here, certainly what Hezbollah wants, they want an agreement because they're in self-preservation mode. Now, Israel's in a problem because they can't really file down Hezbollah all the way, because in order to do that, you'd have to have a military operation throughout the entirety of Lebanon. Now, how many troops would that take? You'd have to now remobilize hundreds of thousands of troops to go into Lebanon. How long are you going to be in Lebanon? So what Israel's figured out, what they can do and what they need to do is just, and this is where the military doctrine has changed, which is you don't allow an organization like Hezbollah to amass a force posture on your border. And that's why Israel's cleared out all this land up to the Litani. But what you hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu is that they're now pushing even past the Litani River, that every time they see some kind of a movement by Hezbollah or an attempt to reorganize, that Israel's going a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further, so that Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations get the idea that every time you take a step closer to Israel, you're actually losing sovereignty over more and more and more of your territory. But like we said, now there's a lot of back and forth. You talk about these drones. We've started to see in the last few weeks and months that Hezbollah is now increasingly using these fiber optic drones, which have been a feature of the war between Russia and Ukraine. They're very, very hard to detect because they don't use radio frequency, so you can't detect when they've been launched. You can't really track them so much via radar. So I don't know. Israel's trying to figure out and develop methods for dealing with these more difficult to detect drones. I believe that they are coming up with things. I don't know if they're coming up with little drones with scissors, that can cut the fiber optic cable.
They were talking about nets, catching them in nets, all kinds of. Listen, we're the startup nation. I have no doubt it's going to happen. Israel will find a solution to these drones. Unfortunately, we're seeing, constant barrages, rockets and drones on the northern border. School is closed right now. It's really disrupting, unfortunately, life for those living along the border there. But I think eventually we'll come up with something to handle those drones. I just hope that these soldiers are safe and they don't pay that price. But the last couple of days have not been good.
Well, there certainly is the possibility that Israel and Hezbollah reach via Lebanon some sort of a negotiated agreement to create quiet. And then again, it's a testing of the waters between Hezbollah and Israel. You're always playing in this game of tit for tat, which can constantly erupt into something much bigger. But you have to believe at this point that Hezbollah recognizes that if it wants to survive and to repair the damage, it probably needs an extended period of quiet. So the problem here is that they're not going to get the type of quiet that they got in 2006.
Right.
Meaning that Israel's not going to give them the quiet that they seek to rebuild. So if they're not going to get the quiet that they seek, then they're not going to give you quiet in return. And we might see this situation of skirmishing or, a drone coming in, killing a soldier, hitting a school in the north, and then Israel responding back without the full-fledged attacking where Hezbollah is firing longer range rockets into Haifa or into Tel Aviv or targeting Israeli natural gas and power infrastructure. Because if that happens, then that Israel is going to do a massive call up and now start to go all the way far north as Beirut. So, it's a tit for tat. It's a feeling each side out. It's a good possibility that you could get this long-term skirmish situation, not exactly quiet, not exactly full-fledged war for an extended period.
But even with all that happening, Israel and Lebanon Friday in talks at the Pentagon, formally launching the security track is what they're calling it, supporting ongoing ceasefire negotiations between the two countries, according to a U.S. readout of the discussions. So even with Israel, Hezbollah fully engaged, ceasefire, not ceasefire in the north, talks are happening in Washington right now for a full-fledged deal between Israel and Lebanon. But as we've said time and time again, Hezbollah is not included in these talks.
Exactly.
So what do they really mean?
You're talking about Israel and the Lebanese government.
Yes.
The Lebanese government, which again is largely controlled by Christians. There's three different main factions, even though there's many factions in Lebanon, but three predominant factions, which are Maronite Christian, and then you have a Sunni faction, which has a hatred for Hezbollah, and then you have Hezbollah, which is this Shiite faction. So most of the Shiites in Lebanon support Hezbollah. The other two factions, are opposed to Hezbollah, but the problem is that Hezbollah, like the same thing with the IRGC in Iran, the same thing with Hamas in Gaza, is that Hezbollah is the one that has the guns. So they are able to dominate on the ground within the society. So you see, because Hezbollah has been weakened dramatically, that you've created an opportunity where Lebanon actually can begin to enter into some kind of a negotiation with Israel. And there's probably a goodwill there. Both sides see Hezbollah as an enemy, but as long as Hezbollah is there, they don't want to see a normalization agreement between Israel and Lebanon. So they may be using these talks as a trigger, a reason why they need to keep up the war against Israel in order to draw the IDF further in. And what they're hoping then is that these other factions in Lebanon actually turn against Israel and the IDF for their continued attacks inside Lebanon. So very, very complex situation that's being managed at the highest levels in Washington. We know Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, is the one leading negotiations from the Israeli side. But you can be sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu is managing, all these things: Iran, the president, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Gaza, global diplomacy, all at the same time.
Yeah, let's shift to Gaza now if we can. Israel this week taking out Mohammed Odeh. He was the new military chief of Hamas. Any new military chief that steps up, Israel takes out. That's just been the policy since, even with the ceasefire with Hamas down in Gaza. Israel also taking out another perpetrator of the October 7th massacre, deputy commander of Hamas's Gaza brigade, Hassan Hussein Aslim. So these targeted strikes continue. At the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that Israel is going to go from 60% control of Gaza up to 70% as part of the ongoing campaign against Hamas. We have this clip.
אנחנו עכשיו ב-60% משטח הרצועה, היינו ב-50, עברנו ל-60, הדירקטיב השני לעבור תתחו לפי הסדר, קודם כל 70, בוא נתחיל בזה.
So there you have the clip, and just to go over what people were saying in the crowd, they were saying to the Prime Minister, no, not 70%, let's go 100% control in Gaza. The Prime Minister saying, no, let's wait a minute, let's go from 60 to 70, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Prime Minister saying we got to go in stages. If you remember when Israel signed the ceasefire with Gaza, according to the Trump 20-point plan, Israel was in control of 53% of Gaza, which basically means a line halfway through the Gaza Strip, but then little jet outs on both the southern and the northern borders in order to create a buffer barrier between Gaza and every area of Israel where Gaza touches, as well as a significant buffer between Gaza and Egypt, so that Egypt cannot be used as a smuggling route back into the Gaza Strip. And what we've seen now already is that as the IDF continues to operate in Gaza, as Hamas is not relinquishing control of the Strip as it's supposed to do under the 20-point plan. That 20-point plan calls for the disarmament of Hamas and really strives to see another force take control in Gaza, demilitarization, disarmament, and having some other political force in control. As long as Hamas is still in power, what you're seeing is that the IDF is taking steps beyond that yellow line and redrawing it in real time. And so you see that Israel already controls more than 60% of the Gaza Strip instead of 53 as it did in the beginning. And you're hearing the Prime Minister saying that this 60% is soon going to be 70%. And yes, you heard the calls there for among the crowd saying, go take 100%. And the Prime Minister saying, maybe, but we're going to do things right now in stages. As first things first, let's get from 60 to 70%.
I vote for 100% because that's how we got here. When we left Gush Katif, the Jewish communities in Gaza back in 2005, in my opinion, that led directly to the October 7th massacre years later. So one day I would hope and pray that we're going to go resettle Gaza Jewish communities there.
Well, the thing to understand is that Israel did not control 100% of the Gaza Strip when you had the settlements in Gaza. And there was part of what was called like a five-finger plan where you had some Jewish settlements in the north, in the center, and the south in order to create a presence for the IDF at strategic points within Gaza, right? So there wasn't just a pure military occupation, that the military was there to protect the residents. But what that did was you had a situation where Gaza was essentially like Area A in Judea and Samaria. And Area A is an area that's supposed to be under Palestinian Authority civilian control, civil control, and military control. But we know that the IDF is frequently going into Area A. This is the policy of mowing the grass. You're able to mow the grass when the IDF is there, and then you see that weeds are popping up when terrorist activity is rising to the surface. You go in and you clean it out the moment you notice it. You don't wait until an October 7th or until all of a sudden Hamas starts firing 50 rockets at your town in order to go in. At that point, it's too late. You have to be in, you have to use intelligence, and then to be cutting down the terrorists as soon as they pop up. But it didn't mean that Israel controlled the entirety of Gaza. They controlled actually a very small piece of the territory of Gaza, but they were present.
Right.
And so now there are calls to resettle in Gaza, because what resettling in Gaza does is it legitimizes a permanent IDF presence there. Now, the reason why the prime minister is saying we don't want 100% right now is because the Gazans are still there, right? Now, if you get to a situation where you start to get the voluntary emigration of Gazans out of the Strip, and according to a lot of the polls that we've seen, anywhere from 50 to 80% of Gazans are saying that they want to leave. The problem is that they're not being given a route to go. Israel would facilitate it, but there has to be a country willing to take them. At certain points, there were talks about potentially in Libya. There was other talks potentially about sending tens of thousands or more to Indonesia. There was possible talks about Somaliland, which Israel has normalized relations with, accepting some Gazans. So if you got a situation where Gazans would leave, would Israel take over the Strip? Of course it would. But meanwhile, Israel doesn't want to be responsible for the million plus Gazans that are currently living in tents in the Strip. So it's taking areas slowly, and squeezing the Gazans into a more narrow area where Hamas is still running around and terrorizing that population with guns.
Groups like UNRWA certainly don't want them to leave. The Gazans, they want to keep them there as pawns against the state of Israel. We've seen that time and time again, but I want to get to the UN right now. Israel announcing this week that it is suspending relations with the office of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, after Israeli entities were included on a UN blacklist concerning sexual violence in conflict zones. Cannot make this stuff up, Alex. Unbelievable that Israel is put in the same category as ISIS, Hamas, and the most barbaric terrorist organizations in the world in regard to sexual violence. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, saying the Israeli mission would have no further contact with the Secretary General's office as long as Guterres remains in his position. Danon saying this is a moral disgrace that proves the UN head has lost all credibility.
Well, we just saw, what was it, less than 2 weeks ago, that Nick Kristof came out with his story in the New York Times stating that Israel was conducting sexual abuse against Palestinian prisoners. You're using 14 sources that some are unconfirmed and some are notorious Israel haters, and that article came out just as Israel was releasing a major report that it had conducted over more than a year, using over 1,000 sources to detail and document the systemic sexual abuse of Israelis on October 7th and against hostages. So they just do an inversion and they steal the headline.
Sure.
And here you had the UN doing similar and putting Israel on the blacklist together with these terrorist organizations, saying that Israel is a perpetrator of sexual abuse against Palestinians. And what's so ironic here is that several years ago, and you can look this stuff up, there was actually a report that came out that accused the IDF of being a racist military because the military did not rape, the men of the IDF did not rape the Palestinian women, right? So that was an indication that it's racist. So, they say on the one hand, you're raping when you don't, and then when they acknowledge that you don't, they say you don't because it was racist. Now this move by Danon, it's really symbolic because here we are now at basically the beginning of June of 2026, and Guterres is in the second of his consecutive 5-year terms as the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he's going to be out at the end of December. There's going to be a new Secretary General of the United Nations. And Danny Danon, in his announcement, said, we're suspending any contact with Guterres' office, but they would reopen some kind of relations with a new Secretary General when a new one is appointed. And certainly Israel's hoping that you get a better one. I don't want to say like you're going to get a pro-Israel
Good luck with that.
Secretary General, but as these things go, you have ones that are worse, and then you have ones that are more reasonable, or ones that you can work with, you can talk to. Apparently, Danone believes that Guterres at this point is one you just can't even talk to anymore. But I think this raises a even greater question. What the heck is Israel still doing at the United Nations?
Seriously.
This is a body that seems to have been organized specifically for the purpose of delegitimizing Israel on the international stage. It's clear that the mandate of the UN, which came after the horrific Second World War, after the failure of the League of Nations to prevent that Second World War, has just done nothing to restore credibility in the world. You have all these wars, all over the world, taking place, raging under the UN's watch, and this isn't a body that censures Israel more than not only any other country in the world, but more than all other countries in the world combined. I mean, you can take any kind of criticism you want with the Israeli government, with the state of Israel, but just walk around this place. I invite anybody to walk around here and to tell the person that you're talking to that this place is worse than Iran, worse than Sudan. And these are the countries that get put on the human rights committees, on the women's committees. Iran is put on a committee. These get put on the non-nuclear proliferation committees. These horrific violators of human rights in every way. And here the UN says that Israel is the worst country in the entire world. I mean, come on, give me a break. It's ridiculous.
One big joke, but I want to stick with New York City, Alex, because by the time people are watching this, it'll probably be after the fact. But today is the Salute to Israel Day Parade in Manhattan, where tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers and pro-Israel supporters march in New York City, showing their support for the state of Israel. For the first time in years, the mayor of New York City,
I think it's the first time ever.
The mayor of New York City will not be there. Zohran Mamdani boycotting, I guess you could say, boycotting the event, publicly saying he will not attend this year's parade. At the same time, you did have Jessica Tisch, the NYPD commissioner, saying she would, in fact, attend the event. Let's check out this clip.
Commissioner, do you have any concerns about the mayor not being there for significant reasons too?
No, it's the mayor's decision not to march, and it is my decision to march proudly.
So, Alex, perhaps the biggest pro-Israel event outside of the country held annually. I know when I was in college, I marched in the Israel Day Parade, Salute to Israel Parade with pride, and it's going on again. But the mayor of New York City will not be making an appearance.
It's just amazing that you've gotten to a point where a mayor of New York City, the city with the most Jews in the entire world outside of Israel, you're talking about like between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and you have people coming also from New Jersey and elsewhere, like outside of the city in the surrounding tri-state area, where you probably have something like over 2 million Jews in this one concentrated tri-state area. This is the #1 event, like you said. And I've been at that parade many times. I've broadcasted from that parade and in the concert in Central Park that used to take place right after that parade on multiple occasions, and it was really a very important event for the Jewish community to connect and show solidarity with the state of Israel. But to now to get to a point where you have a mayor in this city, which has the highest concentration of Jews anywhere in the world, that says that they don't even want to participate in the Israel Day Parade, it's a big statement. And then at the same time, you've got this tension within the mayor's own administration because the police chief, the police commissioner of the NYPD, Jessica Tisch, who's the daughter of James Tisch, who was a former chairman of the Jewish Federations in New York and even, I believe, nationally in the United States. She comes to a press conference standing right next to Mamdani wearing a Jewish star necklace saying that she will march proudly. But in addition to marching proudly, which is great, that's important in its own right, that they are putting into place this year one of the most sophisticated security arrangements around this parade, which quite frankly could become a big target. I think this year you're going to see many more protests around this parade. It's not just the mayor that says that he won't march in it, but rather that, like we saw on university campuses at Columbia and elsewhere, that you could have a lot of pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas agitators along the route of the parade, and hopefully this parade will go off without a hitch, without a major security incident. But in this growing trend of anti-Semitism, nonviolent as well as violent, we really, really hope that everybody that comes out to this parade today stays safe.
So that's the biggest pro-Israel event outside of the state of Israel. Now let's talk about arguably the biggest pro-Israel event in Israel, and that, of course, is the JNS International Policy Summit, which is taking place in just a few weeks, June 21st through the 23rd, here in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. A lot of events surrounding the conference itself. There are tours, there's a Shabbat, there's the conference itself. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, well, actually, the conference is becoming one of the most important pro-Israel events and solidarity events between Israel and the United States, as well as Israel as supporters around the world. It's amazing only in the second year how much buzz the conference has gotten. We were supposed to have the conference back in April. We had to postpone it due to the war. We're almost sold out, but there are still tickets. People can go on to jns-summit.org, or you can get the link at jns.org. You'll see it there as well. But an incredible array of Israeli politicians, including President Isaac Herzog, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, several other ministers, including Minister Shikli of Diaspora Affairs, Minister Gamliel of Science and Technology, and several other of the Minister Eli Cohen, I believe, of the energy portfolio, Avi Dichter, who is the Minister of Agriculture, and you're going to have also many ambassadors, including hopefully Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, several members of the U.S. administration we hope are going to be there, including those that are really responsible for dealing with the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, including the president's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Yehuda Kaplan, possibly other members of that administration from the Justice Department, including Harmeet Dillon, including Leo Terrell. Others, there could be other guests there, other diplomats from other countries.
Alex Freeman will be there.
I'll be here. Jonathan Tobin, our editor-in-chief, will be here. The former...
I'll be there.
You'll be here. In addition, a former star here at JNS who's been more recently appointed as the International Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister, and is also, her name has been floated as a potential candidate to become Consul General in New York City. Carolyn Glick will be there giving more remarks, Melanie Phillips as well, and you'll have some members of Parliament, including some very high-ranking government officials from European countries and some members of the Gulf countries coming. So a real array of politicians, diplomats, members of Parliament, in addition to all kinds of legal experts helping to fight for Israel in the various legal forums around the world, those challenging anti-Semitism, many journalists, and also plenty of social media influencers. There'll be over 200 speakers in a 2.5-day period. And we hope that among those speakers will be the Prime Minister, who did deliver remarks at the first JNS Summit last year. The Prime Minister has been invited to attend. Of course, we have seen that the Prime Minister is dealing with many urgent matters of state. So we're hopeful that he'll attend, but we'll know when it happens, maybe even down to the wire, if he will be there. We hope he comes, and we hope that everybody else will join us as well.
Give us the link again to sign up.
You can go to jns-summit.org. In addition, you can find the link at jns.org.
Looking forward to the second annual International Policy Summit. It's going to be a great event. Don't miss it. And that's going to do it for today's edition of Jerusalem Minute. Here on JNS TV, Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News, alongside JNS CEO Alex Freeman. Thanks so much for joining us. Give us a super thanks. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Go to JNS TV for all the amazing content provided. And also go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Have a great week. We'll see you next week here on Jerusalem Minute on JNS TV.